Well, hey guys, it's Biggs, the Mad Aquarist. I'm sitting here with a new friend. This is Dr. Oldfield. Nice to see you, Ron.
Hey, Chris.
We had a lot of conversations back and forth with email. Now, Ron's going to talk about one particular type of fish and maybe a bit about the region and his experiences with that fish. But a while back, a good friend of mine from Germany snapped a picture of one fish that caused a lot of turmoil on the internet. And the real fact is that a lot of hobbyists will look at a fish and then they'll basically be told something different from the scientific community. And just because their experience with that fish and the way it appeared in their fish tank, they'll say, no, that's not that fish. So on this one, we're going to include some videos of the fish breeding. We're going to talk about the fish in some great deal. We're going to not just talk with Ron, we're also going to bring Mr. Juan Miguel Artigas from Mexico, who's worked with the fish intimately, and we're going to both get their two sides of it. And we're going to kind of try and break down that myth by using the academics that actually work with these fish in a very intimate and different way, that understand the systematics and the morphologies and things like that and how these fish work. And then these guys can help discredit and maybe put your minds at ease. So today we're going to talk about Herichthys minckleyi. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, tell me a bit about you, where you come from, how we got to where we are, and a bit about your experiences with this fish.
Yeah, so it's probably no accident that we're here at the Ohio Cichlid Association's annual extravaganza. I'm actually from Ohio, and I've been attending this meeting since the late 1990s. And I actually live in Cleveland now. I'm a senior instructor at Case Western Reserve University here in Cleveland. And I've been here for about 12 years. And before that, I did my PhD in the Museum of Zoology at the University of Michigan.
And that was in the lab of Miller, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Dr. Robert Rush Miller's old lab. And he had passed shortly after I arrived there, but we still had a lot of other cichlid biologists doing work in the museum around the same time that I was. For you people in the hobby, you may have heard of Juan Schmitter-Soto, who was in the lab working on his revision of Central American cichlid taxonomy at the time that I was there. Prasanta Chakrabarty was also my lab mate during that time. And there were some other folks that were there also that hobbyists may not know, but it was a really great academic community. I arrived at studying the Cuatro Cienegas cichlid, Herichthys minckleyi, not directly. I started off with Midas cichlids. That's what I did my PhD on, and then I switched over to Herichthys later. The reason I got interested in Midas cichlids was I was interested in their reproductive development. So for those of you that are in the hobby, you may have heard of Ron Coleman's Cichlids in Science column that he used to do for Cichlid News.
Yes.
And in one of those articles that he wrote summarized a scientific article that was published by George Barlow in 1993 that said that Midas cichlids were sexually plastic and that they couldn't change sex as adults like sex-changing marine fishes could. Yep. But they could develop as either a male or a female based on the social experiences that they underwent when they were juveniles.
The need, yeah.
Yeah. So I was fascinated by that and decided to do my PhD on that. And it was kind of disappointing. It was a real challenge to figure it out, but it turned out that it was not true.
Okay.
And I published several studies on that. But the thing is that when you finish a line of work like that, it just kind of ends up, they're not sexually plastic. They probably have sex determined genetically, like most other vertebrate animals do. It's kind of a dead end, and
it's kind of disheartening for all that work you spend.
Well,
you always want that win.
Yeah. It was satisfying to solve a problem, I guess, but it was challenging because I set off just accepting that it was fact. It was in a published academic study, so it must be a fact, right? And then when the experiments didn't work, it caused me to step back and take another look. And I talked to George Barlow about it before he passed, who's obviously very famous.
You mentioned some real legends.
Yeah.
Rush Miller was the guy for Central American cichlids in North America with all the work he was doing, and Barlow as well. His book, The Cichlid Fishes, is probably, without a doubt, probably the best book that's ever been written on cichlid fish that has really taken the academic and bringing it down to the hobbyist level. It's a wonderful read.
It is a great book. I agree.
I'll put a picture of it up on the screen.
So that was really cool. But after that, I wanted to move over to something else. So that turned out to be Cuatro Cienegas cichlids. And we had people interested in Cuatro Cienegas cichlids. Actually, another person that was working on his PhD when I was working on my PhD at the University of Michigan was Josh Trapani, who studied the difference in pharyngeal jaws in the different morphs. He published several studies on that. One of the main things he tried to do was to analyze the external morphology and of different individuals, and then see if you could tell just by looking at the outside, and then the outside of the animal, then running it through statistical software, if you could tell if an individual had either papilliform jaws or molariform jaws.
Okay.
So I was familiar with that species as early as the
Was
early...
that area protected at that time?
I think that it was.
So
I never
that's a
went
good
there.
thing from a scientific standpoint. It's like, you know that it's an isolated population. It's protected in the area. There's not a lot of interference from the outside or introduction of other species by canals.
To some extent, yes. So even though it's technically protected, in reality, there are a lot of threats to Cuatro Cienegas.
Okay.
And that's another issue entirely, and it's a really serious issue because there are actually grape vineyards there, which you wouldn't think it would make sense to grow grapes in the desert.
In the desert.
But they irrigate water for that.
From that Cuatro Cienegas.
From Cuatro Cienegas, yeah. There's also Jewel cichlids have been introduced there. And you think, this place is isolated in the middle of nowhere in the desert of northern Mexico, and somehow Jewel cichlids just turned up there.
Well, they migrated there, clearly.
But they crossed desert and 2 mountain ranges to get there.
And an ocean.
And there are no pet stores near there.
No, there's nothing there
at
all. It's very, very remote.
Yeah, so it was protected at that time, but I had never gone there at that time. The reason that I got interested in this species was because I'd read in an article published with the lead author was Irv Kornfield, who was a geneticist in the 1970s and 1980s.
The name doesn't sound familiar.
One of the co-authors on the study was Jeff Taylor, who I've never met, but I guess went on to work for Old World Tropicals.
Yeah, he's well known, yeah.
He was one of the authors on the paper too. But they went to Cuatro Cienegas to study the different morphs and determine if they were genetically, using genetic data, reproductively isolated. So this is
what we're talking about, guys, in regards to the morph. Is this one species of fish is pretty unique in the fact that in its range where it lives, within its own population, the pharyngeal plates have changed. That some of them are piscivores or molluscivores or stuff like that. There's actually 3 or 4 distinct dental plates available to these fish. Not necessarily the area that you were studying, but so people know what we're talking about when we're talking about morphs.
Yeah. So they had known to be anatomically or morphologically different for quite some time, and they had always assumed up until that point that they must be different species, right? They had probably undergone sympatric speciation.
Some of them even, they look different, like the shape of them was a little bit
different. The
different.
pisciphore looks way different.
Yeah.
So these geneticists went to Cuatro Cienegas to observe them breeding and also to take DNA samples and then determine if they are truly reproductively isolated. Now, the finding was that they're not.
Yep.
And it's really special because they have all these different morphologies, but they're one single species. And then they went on to be described as Herichthys minckleyi.
Like now the tools that are available for the scientist stuff, like I discussed in one of my presentations, with the advent of the use of molecular DNA and that sort of stuff, it's changing the whole game. It's literally like an Etch-a-Sketch for every cichlid hobbyist that cherishes the name of their fish, because it's going to mess up everything, the relationships of everybody. It's crazy.
Yeah, so this was very primitive by today's standards, the analysis that they did. And I don't remember the details, but it was the amount of genetic information that they used was tiny compared to what they use today.
But once you're using DNA as a component, as well as your morphometrics and your metric and all that, heuristics and all that stuff, it's infallible. You can't, DNA doesn't going to lie. So it's going to be very, very, it's going to paint a very clear path.
Yeah, it's better than the information that we can get from DNA is better than what we've had before. But it's still complicated. That's why molecular phylogenies don't always agree in everything. But these folks were observing the fish in Cuatro Cienegas, and they just kind of wrote in passing in the article, we observed a couple females guarding broods with no male present. And then they also observed a male guarding 2 females at the same time, and I did a double take when I read that.
Yeah.
And these folks, they weren't interested in that. They were interested in pharyngeal jaws.
Well, that's not normal thought process for Central America.
No, for someone who's like, they were geneticists that were and trying out to answer a different question. For me, that really struck a chord with me, because I'm like, wait a second, Central American cichlids don't do that.
Yeah.
If you see a Herichthys, there should be a male and a female.
Yeah.
So I thought, gosh, are these fish, are they not monogamous? Like, are they unlike all or almost all other harrowing cichlids? So I started on this journey to solve that problem, and it was very challenging. Came at great personal, financial, and personal costs, but I was able to figure it out, and it was very interesting. And that's how the fish arrived. The fish that are in the hobby right now,
yes.
They're coming out. That's how they got there, is from this research.
Yeah, because it's a protected area, and like it's actually it's protected for taking fish out. You show up trying to collecting fish there, you'll be turned away pretty quick.
I would think. I don't know what would be involved, but I would imagine it would be very difficult to get fish out of Cuatro Cienegas legally in today's day and age. So essentially, I thought, well, who's the kind of world's academic expert, at least on? I mean, a lot of people know, like you mentioned, Juan Miguel Ortigas-Hazas certainly knows a lot about Cuatro Cienegas cichlids. But I thought at a university level that I could work with professionally and try to publish some studies. That person's Dean Hendrickson,
okay,
who's also has a history of working with Juan through the Desert Fishes Council for a long time, and he's the curator of fishes at the University of Texas's Natural History Museum, which I think it's currently called the Texas Biodiversity Center. But essentially, it's kind of like the University of Texas version of the museum that I worked at the University of Michigan. And it turns out, I'd met him before. But I just didn't really know him real well, and I kind of sent him some emails and told him that I was interested in studying these fish. I had no grants or anything like that. I just kind of showed up down there at one point, and he had a whole bunch of these things in aquariums inside, and he also had two huge outdoor concrete lined ponds filled with them. He had two.
Just the one species.
Just the one species. They were irrigation ponds. They were put in there to water the grass in Texas, which to me doesn't make any sense at all. And it turns out they eventually shut them down because they were contributing to the drainage of the Edwards Aquifer.
Okay.
So anyway, he had to eventually take the fish out of there. But they were in there for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years in total. But these ponds were really large, about 25 meters by 25 meters. And about 2 meters deep.
You were the first American to ever use meters as a measurement.
I know. Well, that's the way I've always written it for articles. So, and I heard you use metric yesterday.
Yeah, but just it goes by hand. But even in the auction today, I'd say the code, and if it was a Z, I have to say either in Canada we say Z, you guys said Z or something. Like nobody had a clue what I said. I'm like,
oh really?
It's a letter.
Yeah. So I didn't think twice about the metric after hearing your talk yesterday. But this idea of studying parental care and mating behavior in this species was completely new. It took me quite some time with Dean for him to understand. I wasn't interested in the pharyngeal jaws. I mentioned something about studying the fish in aquariums. He said, well, yeah, but the pharyngeal jaws won't develop in an aquarium. They need snails to provide like the force on the pharyngeal jaw to help it thicken up.
And right at birth, they need that type of lifestyle.
Yes, they do. It's like a callus on your hand.
Yeah.
It's similar to that. And I had to stop and say, wait a second. I don't think you understand what I want to do. I don't care about pharyngeal jaws for this project.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. But for this project, I couldn't care less if they were papilliform or malariform or what have you. And he's like, wait, oh, okay. And we moved forward. We went to Cuatro Cienegas in, I think, August of 2008 and made some observations. And basically, some of you may also know Kapil Mandrekar, who is interested in all fish and is pretty active in the hobby. And he went with us, and we basically walked around Cuatro Cienegas with clipboards and recorded data. So we'd find a female guarding offspring and watch her for 15 minutes. And I don't know, I don't remember the exact details, but it was like every 30 seconds we would score whether or not there was a male present at the nest.
Yeah, based on what you wanted to study. Yeah.
Yeah, we would also write down how far away the female was. Before we started watching her, we would take a yardstick or meter stick put it in the water, and see, calibrate, okay, so this plant is 0.5 meters away from the kind of core of the nest. Yeah. This rock is 2 meters away. And so we would also record how far the female was away from the core of the babies. And if there was a male present, how far was he? Yeah. And then we did that in Cuatro Cienegas, and then we came back to Texas and did the same thing in Texas. So one of the really amazing things about this project, despite how difficult it was that there were several things that just worked out really, really well. So it so happens that although the Texas cichlid, which is also called the Rio Grande cichlid in the fisheries community, Herichthys cyanegatatus, we decided to use that as kind of a baseline comparison to determine if Cuatro Cienegas cichlids experience some kind of evolution in their mating behavior to become polygynous. So we also observed those because there have been research on them before that it very clearly showed that even in the wild, not just in aquariums, but in the wild, they're very strictly monogamous. They form pairs that the pairs work together to guard a territory. We found out quantitatively about 1 meter in diameter. They work together to care for their babies. We found out that male Cuatro Cienegas cichlids will never care for their babies. They guard the territory, but they won't directly tend the babies.
And a lot of these observations are things that no matter what we would do in an aquarium, we would never see those behaviors because the environment is just not big enough.
Exactly, yeah.
And we usually only start out with a group of 6 and grow them up, and then they pair off, and then they kill the other 4. Yeah. So we only have 2 to work with anyways.
I actually mentioned that in this article. I don't like that. Yeah. I like having a bigger tank where they can behave more naturally. Yeah. It means I can't have as many fish, but I don't know. That's the way I did it with these guys. But we also observed the Texas cichlids in Texas, and it so happens that they're not native to Austin, where the University of Texas is. They're just native to the Rio Grande. That's as far north as they get. But they've been introduced.
Yes, they're introduced all over the place.
Yeah. And it's basically the same habitat. They're behaving, we can assume that that's their natural behavior. If we see them in San Marcos or San Antonio or Austin, they're in the streams. You can walk along the
river walk in San Antonio. You can see them right off the side. Yeah.
I have been there. I don't remember if I could see them there, but it's similar. You can see them in San Antonio or San Marcos and other places in Central Texas. So we were able to record data from those fish too. Now, it turns out that although those Texas cichlids had small territories, the males in Cuatro Cienegas had huge territories. And we took some photos of that. There would be one big male swimming around a very large area, maybe half the size of this room that we're in right now. And there would be no other big males. There might be some smaller males and smaller females kind of swimming around, but then the breeding females would be kind of equally spaced, and they would just be in this male's territory that he owned. Very different than what we saw in the Texas.
And there's not a lot of other species in that environment.
Yes. So very different than, say, in Nicaragua, where I studied the Midas cichlid. There are publications on this. About the intense competition among species for breeding sites in Lake Hilawa. Ken McKay published a study on that back in the 70s. It's not like that at all. There are a few other fish species there, but they're breeding differently. They're not directly competing like they would in some other cichlid localities. So basically, if you get to be a big macho dominant male, you can own one of these sites, and then you can mate with multiple females. And that was really fascinating. So we found out that, and not just qualitatively. So we've got the photographs, but we also have the data that show, okay, the males are present much less often. So in the study that we published in 2015, we showed, okay, a female with babies, 100% of the time has a male present in a 15-minute observation period. A female in Cuatro Cienegas, it was like 20 or 30% of the time.
Okay.
So the males.
There's not a lot of competition though, so they have a looser population of species, so they're able to do that. You go to almost any river system in Central America, and you're going to have what I call an invertebrate picker. You're going to have a cruise predator. You'll have what I call water cows, the big vieja species and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you'll kind of have all those species that are all stratified in the different layers and stuff. But in Cuatro Cienegas, you don't have that.
No, you don't have that. And if in these other environments too, if the male were to leave, the babies would probably be eaten a lot more easily.
By another male.
Well, by anything. I think that the one of the things that probably selected monogamy in Central American cichlids is all the other fish that want to eat their babies.
The need.
Yeah, the need for it. And in Cuatro Cienegas, you don't have that. You don't have as many other fish that want to eat the babies, so the male's free to leave. Now, one of the things that we did is we measured aggressive behavior in female Cuatro Cienegas cichlids and female Texas cichlids, and we found that the females compensate for the absence of the male, and they work harder than female Texas cichlids. So
they're like the Nitropolis from Nicaragua.
Yeah.
That, a little 3-inch fish has to compete with a meter-long bovine, and they can pin them in the corner.
Yeah. It's like that. She's working harder than the female Texas cichlids. So that was really interesting. But what was equally as interesting, I think, is that they've evolved different color patterns. So this had been published by Juan Miguel Artigas Azas several times over the last couple decades. And he has photographs of males, and they're solid black. Yeah. And that's something that you don't see in any other Herichthys species, that you get this solid black color. And then the females are solid white. So that seems really strange. If you look at like a Texas cichlid, they're gray, and actually they look very similar to Cuatro Cienegas cichlids when they're not breeding. They're basically gray fish with little dots all over them.
Yeah. Well, a lot of centrals are known to have that real dramatic pattern. Like the whole labor dens complex, some of them are just butt ugly. And then when they go into breeding dress, you come down into your room and like, what fish is that? And you don't know what it is, and you're not prepared for it.
That was actually, was that your talk yesterday? When you showed,
the Bartonite. Like, it's an ugly fish.
Gray,
when
ugly
it's,
fish,
and then when it goes into its breeding pattern, but when they go into their breeding pattern, it's like a warning sign for every other inhabitant of that tank. You better stay clear.
Yeah, that was cool. But even that species, when they go undergo the color change, the males and the females, they change the same color pattern. Yep. And that's the way the Texas cichlids are too. And it's a different pattern, but the back of the half of the body is black and the front half is white. And it's weird then, okay, why is it that this species in Cuatro Cienegas, not only do they have this different mating system, not only do they have weird pharyngeal jaws, but now they have this different color pattern that is not only different in the pattern itself, but different in how it works than all the other fish. And this is if you know very much about the evolution of mating systems and parental care, it's not really that surprising, because in species in which there's a lot more competition among males, well, they have greater sexual selection. So they evolve different traits that are not, or exaggerated traits that might not be present in a monogamous species. Because in a monogamous species like the Texas cichlid, it's not that hard to get a mate. Yeah. There's one male for every female, and there's plenty to go around.
They're plentiful too,
Yeah, but if you're a Cuatro Cienegas cichlid male, you're essentially getting no matings unless you're a big dominant macho male, and then you get a whole bunch. Yeah. So it's really beneficial to be big and tough and to signal that you are. And that was what we thought, that black coloration.
Well, a lot of live bears, even Central American live bears, even the common guppy. When you talk about gonopodium, there's been all sorts of studies to prove that the male guppy that has the biggest gonopodium will generally be the one that is selected. But having a giant gonopodium, there's actual things. It slows the fish down. It's cumbersome. Like that is now a fish that's more at risk of predation. But that's the one that all the ladies want.
Right.
We're gonna keep this YouTube friendly.